Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm Susan, and I am the CEO, the creator of Embodied Opportunities at the Age of Becoming. And today, a conversation with Kira Hauer, a women's empowerment coach specializing in, among other things, women's sexuality over 50. Kira has been a women's empowerment coach for over 20 years. She specializes in love, relationships, and sexuality coaching, in addition to executive coaching and life transitions. As she says, she coaches from the bedroom to the boardroom and back again. She focuses on women at midlife, what she calls the second spring, and invites women to think about aging in a radically radiant way. Kira and I are both trained as Nia Black Belt teachers, and she brings that body-centered, sensation-based approach to her coaching. I can personally attest to the transformational power of her work, and I'm delighted to have her here to share some of her wisdom with the Age of Becoming community. Welcome, Kira. I'm so glad you're here.
So glad to be here. I'm honored. And thank you so much, Susan. It's so wonderful to work with you and connect with you again in a
Yeah, in
different
a
realm.
different way, right? Yeah, after many years of doing movement teaching together, and it is a joy to connect in this way too. So thank you for being here. So let's just jump right in. I feel like this topic is so important. It's been really top of mind for me as I have been working toward creating this community. And sex to me, in my experience, especially sex at midlife, seems to be something that we don't really talk about very much, even amongst ourselves. And to me, what I notice is this silence, this reluctance to talk about it, ends leaves us with a lot of misinformation, a lot of assumptions that we don't even know that we're making. So my first question is what's the first thing that you really want every woman who's over 50 to know about sexuality?
Oh, okay. Well, um, the first thing I would say is that there are so many myths and we need to break them down. And so, one being that your sexual energy diminishes as you age. I think that that's the biggest myth, and it's very common for it to be spread. This myth. I just read an article that about a gynecologist who told her early 50 something patient that women stopped having sex around 65. You know,
Oh,
this is a gynecologist, right? And so this is the kind of misinformation. These are the assumptions that we need to break down. We need to turn it on its head. And culturally, we're not very good at that. So it's very important to recognize that our bodies have the potential, and certainly our emotional bodies and our spirit wants to continue to engage in pleasure and wants to have a sensual and erotic experience as we age. And I think that part of it is that our culture is youth obsessed. And so because of that, there's this kind of silencing that happens because people don't want to think about, oh gosh, what happens in the bedroom with older people. But the reality is that there's magic that can happen. Why would it not happen?
right.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's life force. So I think that there is the pleasure and the sensuality that you talked about, and we talk about that in our movement practice so
Yeah.
often about how important it is to make choices for pleasure. But even beyond that,
Yeah.
the sheer life force energy that is sexual energy is so
Yeah.
important throughout our lives. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that I hear that. And
Yeah.
and
And
similar. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Yes, it is life force energy. And if you think about, the core of sexuality is about creation and birth, right? But we all have it, whether you've birthed or not. We have this life force energy, which also then generates a creativity. And this is why I love the notion of a second spring. In Asia, they refer to a woman's menopause as her second spring.
Mm.
And when I heard that the first time, I was just blown away. And I said, oh my God, how can we not know this in the West? We need to know this. Imagine if every woman in the United States knew that and said, I'm entering my second spring. What are you doing for your second spring? Right? So it's this completely different philosophy and conceptualization of a way of looking at way of being in our midlife and beyond. And that's what I'm so excited about sharing with people, is this notion that we don't have to accept that it's going to go vroom, we don't have to accept that. In fact, we can't accept it
Mm.
because we accept it at our own peril in a lot of ways.
And I think that you're right. I really appreciate your um, acknowledging our culture's not youth obsession, fear of aging, and also a tendency to see. I might say that women's sexuality at all ages, but particularly women as they get older, as being broken in some ways, somehow deficient or dysfunctional. And and I feel like that that's an important myth to break, right? Is this idea of this brokenness, this sort of like hobbling into the breakdown lane kind of thing, right?
Yep. Yep. And that's a myth that does start at a very young age, frankly. So part of it is because we have a tendency to see sexuality only through the lens of male sexuality. So first of all, there's not enough good sex ed in this country. Okay. So it starts there. So we start with misinformation. Okay. Then we start to have sexual experiences, and we start to wonder, okay, so am I doing this right? Am I a lot of times women will get into kind of a performance-based, performatory kind of stance when it comes to sex. And what happens as we age is there's this natural life transition as we move from, into our middle age, where there's a shift that happens from focusing on other people to focusing more on ourselves a little bit, okay, which is a beautiful thing. And what can happen in the bedroom is that women can say, I'm kind of done. I don't need to provide for you anymore, right? And in that process, she's also shutting off her own sexual experience, often, not always, certainly. But that's a dynamic that I see a lot. And that's also part of the shutting down. And so that's where we need to look at and kind of dissect that a little bit and figure out what's actually happening there. There's a lot of myth around women's sexual function in general, and especially as women age. And a lot of sexual dysfunction comes from a relational place, not from a physical place. And yet women have a tendency to say, what's wrong with me?
So can you
Right?
give me an example of something, of a situation that would be the case, that might be something that might be classified as a dysfunction is actually a reflection of the relational situation?
Sure, low libido.
Okay, right on. I mean,
Some
like,
people, you know what?
like
I'm just not that interested. I used to be, and I'm just not anymore. Okay, well, let's look at the relationship. What is the health of your relationship right now? And how much variety do you have? How much creativity do you have between the two of you? How much intimacy is there? How vulnerable do you both feel that
Like
you that?
from an emotional point of view, as much, if not more, than as a physical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Women really need um, desire before they feel arousal. And that's something, especially over long-term monogamous relationships, can be very, very challenging. How do you create that desire when you've been with the same person for 15, 20 years
Or
and it's
more.
starting to, or 40 or 50,
Yeah,
it's kind of habit. We have habits. And the thing is that the body really needs it craves variety as much as it craves stability, right? So we need to balance the two.
right, right. Well, we talk about this in movement, that we have movement habits, but what the body loves is doing a bunch of different things: fast, slow, big, small. We talk about it in regards to nutrition, that, eat the rainbow, and lots of variety is what we thrive on. So it's no big surprise, right? um
Right.
and but it takes energy. It takes like a willingness to invest in
Mhm.
that, because the habit is so easy to fall into, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what ends up happening is I see this again and again is that women just say, you know what, I'm just not interested in sex. I'm just not interested. I'm done with that. Like that part of their life is over. And it's so sad to me because our bodies are craving not just sexual pleasure, but sensual pleasure, erotic pleasure. Again, that life force energy,
Right.
you know, and and the variety piece I think is an important one to talk about because people might say, okay, so how do we get it? We have this habit, we do the same thing all the time, it's boring me, and it makes me not want to go anywhere near my partner, right? And I think that we need to expand our definition of sex, especially as we get older, because and through menopause, we this notion of like drying up,
Oh yeah, that was
there.
my next question. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to ask me the question?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a short documentary that went up on the New York Times a
Yes, I
couple of weeks
saw it.
ago, and it was very charming and quite lovely in a lot of ways. But one of the things that really upset me, it was talking about various experiences of menopause, and the sexual line of the documentary felt totally negative and very opposed to my own experience. But one of the things the woman said, sort of like it was a fact, was, well, yes, we just dry up. And I remember just kind of going, no.
Right. Right. That's exactly the attitude that I'm trying to shift. Is that you don't need to accept that as truth with a capital T. Now, there is a truth with a small t, which happens in our body, which is that as we lose estrogen, we lose lubrication, right? But that's easy. You can purchase lubrication. You can play with all sorts of different kinds of lubrication. And one of the best ways to get lubrication is natural and free, which is from your breath,
Hmm.
right? When we breathe, especially if we breathe deeply, and even better, connect your breath to your pelvic bowl, you will create lubrication. Now, for some women, that may not be enough and they need extra help with, something that comes in a bottle or a jar, but that's fine. It's so easy. So to say, you know, sex is too painful, and again, this goes back to sex as intercourse only, and that's a whole other conversation, which you may have a question about or not. But, we need to expand our definitions of sex. It
Yeah,
needs to
yeah.
go way, way beyond intercourse. Because for the majority of women, like 75% of the women don't ever orgasm from intercourse,
Right,
ever,
right.
you
And
know?
that's often framed as again a dysfunction or a brokenness, like something's wrong with you.
Yes, which is
So
not
I
true.
love this idea of expanding the definition. So give me something, an example of a way that you would recommend expanding the definition. Like how do I broaden what I see as a sexual experience?
Well, one thing, it's very simple, is to start kissing again. A lot of people
Yeah.
stop kissing. You
Yeah.
know, the art of French kissing is an art, you know, and it is, talk about what could be more vulnerable and sensual and erotic than sharing your tongue with another person's tongue in their mouth. I mean, and to really slow it down. I mean, one of the biggest problems in couples is, especially heterosexual couples, is that the goal is the orgasm, usually the man's orgasm, but even if it's both, but there's like this time frame. And let me ask you this, Susan. When you were growing up, what was the time frame that you had in your mind about how long sex was supposed to last?
12 and a half minutes.
12 and a half minutes.
12
Okay.
and a half
And for me, it was
That's what we said in high school.
12 and a half minutes. And for me, it was 15. Okay. Now you may revisit that 15 many times, depending on how old you are and how, how, how rambunctious your partner is. But the reality is that's not true for women. That's male sexuality. Female sexuality is a whole different ballgame. On average, it takes women about 45 minutes to get fully aroused, which means, again, if you're in a heterosexual relationship with somebody who's coming at this from okay, this is going to be a 15-minute experience, it's like you're speaking two different
Right.
languages,
It's
right?
inevitably not going to work.
Exactly. So changing the expectation about timing and slowing down the pace is like, before you get into doing anything physical at all, that needs to happen. And I think again, for desire, to build desire, each woman is different, right? And that's true physically too. What is going to turn me on might be different than what turns you on, right? And so we need to experiment, but we need to think about, okay, what do I really love? What is erotic for me? Because there's also a difference in sensation. And I know you work a lot with sensation, is, there's a difference between pleasure and erotic pleasure, right? So there might be something that feels good to you, but there might be something that feels really sexual and sensual to you.
Right.
And that's when you want to go sort of towards that. I mean, starting obviously with pleasure, but then really moving towards those sensations. So maybe it's fabric that's on your skin that feels kind of erotic, or it's something that you're tasting. I mean, using the five senses is the best way to connect with your sensual and erotic self, I
Right.
think.
Right. And it's this discernment, right? It's this ability to really start to listen deeply. And one of the things that I notice for myself is that as much as it's important for me to notice what I love, there are other things, like there are certain smells or certain scenarios, right? That I'm just like, this isn't, nay,
Yeah.
no sexy this.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing
Very.
to know, that if there is the like an artificial scented candle, dude, it's over. It's over in my bedroom if you bring one of those in, right? And
I
so,
totally
so like that's for me, that's an important thing to know. And so we often talk about listening to sensation, not just for the big things, but for the subtler sensation when the body's whispering. And that's what I'm hearing you say too. It's like, what is that that thing that
yeah.
happens that feels, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we talk about the five sensations, for me, the thing that comes to mind right away is for me, for sound, I can get into my head very quickly if the music is not right for me. So my husband loves to listen to U2. Well, I love U2 too, but it hearing lyrics, unless they're super sexy lyrics, it doesn't work for me. It takes me out of my head, and I'm, imagining being in a concert or not, or thinking about
right,
somebody
right,
else. And it takes me out of my body. And it took me years to figure this out, to say, like, I knew I didn't like it, but I didn't really want to say anything. And I knew he kind of liked it. And I was like, no, I don't,
yeah,
I love you too.
yeah,
Not that, but I just don't want you to in my bedroom.
yeah. We
You
can
know?
dance to you two in the living room before dinner, but yeah, not
Exactly.
there. Yeah, it was funny. My husband and I were listening to this new artist who sort of fallen in love with, and he uses a lot of vocals in French, and I'm like, I totally love this. I don't speak French. They could be reading like a dishwasher manual. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter, right? It just sort of sounds
Yeah.
sexy.
Yeah. Sounds
And
sensual or
yeah,
sexy or
yeah,
something. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. For me,
Yeah.
I do similar things, not so much with you two, but with like dysfunctional relationship um lyrics, like so many love songs are like, I'm ready to give everything up for you and whatever, like all of this stuff. And I get all like, start analyzing. Oh no, don't say that, honey. Don't say
Yeah.
that. Don't. Yeah.
Right. Well, women do this thing, and we may or may not have spoken about this, Susan. We do what's called grandstanding. And so we create a witness in our head when we're in intimate situations. And it's one of the ways that we stay out of our body. And it's not necessarily a technique, it just happens. And so we when we're grandstanding, it's very hard to connect with that sensual erotic part within your body, in parts, I should say. And so the more that you can kind of turn down the volume on that grandstanding and that witnessing mind and voice, the better. So that means also figuring out, okay, so what music does work for my body? So you have to, you said before, it takes a certain level of awareness and energy and consciousness. You have to put attention to it.
Right, right. So when you say grandstanding, do you mean that you're sort of watching yourself? Like, I know that if I'm not feeling good in my body, if I'm not feeling good about my body, it's like I do feel like I'm like, oh, I think that maybe that's looking a little like
Yep.
Poochie, like, and
Yep.
and I feel myself like I'm
Yeah.
watching myself with this critical eye. Is that what you mean by grandstanding? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So it can happen because of music, which is fun, distracting, or it can happen with your internal voice about how you feel about your own body, for sure, or how you feel about your partner's body, for that matter.
Right, 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 right.
And so yes, so really the goal is to kind of turn that volume down as much as possible.
Right, right.
And the conversation about how women feel about our bodies is so complex, as you know. And
Yeah.
I think that it's one of the most important aspects of the work that I do, and the work that women who are interested in doing this really need to face, is how kind are we being to ourselves? How loving are we? How compassionate are we? Do we talk to ourselves the way we would talk to our best friends? Because if we don't, there's a problem.
Right.
and most women don't.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so we really need to, and especially, quite frankly, with our aging bodies, given the societal norms and expectations, and you know I just think it's really important that we become very, very loving, and and really go overboard to love those parts of your body that you normally are kind of grimacing at,
Yeah.
because those are the parts, and maybe, and not maybe, and celebrating them,
Mm,
and having your partner celebrate them can
yeah.
be incredibly healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, this feels like, as you say, an enormous topic and one that is really important. And in the way that I think that there is this myth that if somehow, if we're harsh to ourselves, we're protecting ourselves, or we're preempting criticism that would come from the outside. I think that it's really long standing. But like all self love and self care, when we really allow ourselves to feel that for ourselves, it really does ripple out into not just our intimate relationships, but part of what it does is ripples out into our relationships with other women, and
Mhm.
creating a culture of care and compassion, and saying, no, Kira, don't talk about my friend Kira like that. Like,
Yeah,
I want you to be kinder to her, right?
yeah, absolutely.
So that feels just really huge, and something that I am aware of even more as we age. Like, so there's all the cultural things, and then the layer on top of, and besides, you're older now. And so, yeah,
Right.
Kira, there is so much here that, I mean, I could keep on going, and I want to do that with you and with our community. But so let's just say, you and I are going to host a workshop for the Age of Becoming community.
So
That will
excited.
happen a little bit later this month. So everybody who's listening to this, stay tuned, and we will send you some details about that. But in the meantime, Kira, tell us how people can find you and your work. And yeah.
Yeah, the best way to find me is on my website. So it's kirahauer.com. And it's KIRAHOWER.
Right on. And you have a lovely PDF handout about the myths about aging, sex and aging. If
Yeah,
people give you an email, would you be willing to share that?
I would love to. Yeah,
Oh,
I'd be happy to do that.
yeah,
It's
I loved that when
detailed.
you sent it to me. I love it. And so one of the things that we'll do in the workshop, that I'm really excited about, is sharing some resources. There are some wonderful resources that you turned me on to. No pun intended. Um, uh, and were transformational for me, for my relationship with myself, and within my relationship with my partner. And so that will be part of what we will share during the workshop too, because that is there's some really great stuff. I told you when we were talking, I was like, I'm a little afraid to do a search on Google on like sex or anything, because I'm afraid of what I'll see. So we'll do a curated Kira list. Yeah, when we do that.
Sounds
Well,
good.
Kira,
Well, I'm really excited to do
yes,
that, to continue this conversation. It's such an important conversation. I
so
feel so
much.
strong
Yes, and
that.
so part of what I'm inviting all of you who are listening is, whether or not you can join us for the workshop, is ask a question. Tell us, what is in your head, what is getting in your way? What are you worried about? We would love to know, because it's really important for us to turn the light on, and no lie can live in the light. So we're going to put our flashlight on the lies, and expand beyond them. So Kira, you are a gift. I am so grateful for you, and we will continue this conversation. And
Thank you. I'm so grateful for you too. You're doing amazing work in the world, and I love what you're offering to everybody.
well,
Always have.
you are a joy. All right, well, friends, as always, breathe deep, shine bright, and show up. We'll both blow you a kiss. Ready, Kira? Mwah. See you later, everybody.